it's meant to be that you're roasting the president. Like, Trump's just there. He's like, actually, he's like there as part of the support.
Elon Musk's recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience was anything but ordinary. Over the course of 3 hours, the billionaire entrepreneur peeled back the layers of corruption, fraud, and financial mismanagement entrenched within the US government. He outright exposed, or so he claims, what he sees as a trillion-dollar scam operating in plain sight. As the director of DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, he has taken a frontline role in identifying and eliminating waste, but his revelations suggest the rot runs far deeper than anyone imagined. Today, we'll delve deep into how Joe Rogan was shocked as Elon Musk exposed the biggest scam in human history. This is something you can't afford to miss. The deep-rooted corruption within government and NGOs. A recent conversation between Elon Musk and Joe Rogan took a darker turn when they delved into the deep-rooted corruption embedded within government institutions and NGOs. Rogan painted a hypothetical yet disturbingly plausible scenario. A career bureaucrat, someone who has spent decades navigating the corridors of power, mastering the art of gaming the system. This individual, entrenched in their position, has no real oversight. With budgets in the billions, a bureaucrat with the right connections and an understanding of the system's loopholes could siphon off millions without raising alarms. All it takes is clever accounting, misallocation of funds disguised as operational expenses, and the exploitation of ambiguous financial reporting structures. This sounds like a plot from a Hollywood film, doesn't it? But guess what? Musk said that such a scenario is actually plausible. Not only that, but it is actually happening. He claims that in many cases, these bureaucrats don't act alone. Instead, they form a quiet but effective network, ensuring that the money continues flowing in ways that benefit them and their allies, rather than the public they're meant to serve. One of the most effective tools in this grand scheme is the manipulation of public funds through NGOs. While non-governmental organizations are often perceived as independent, benevolent entities, the reality is far more complex. Many NGOs receive substantial funding from the government under the pretext of humanitarian efforts, social programs, or international aid. However, Musk highlighted how these organizations frequently serve as conduits for corruption, laundering taxpayer money under the guise of noble causes. Funds earmarked for disaster relief, infrastructure development, or public health initiatives are rerouted through NGOs with vague accountability measures. By the time the money completes its journey, only a fraction remains for the intended purpose, if any at all. The rest has been absorbed through inflated administrative costs, consulting fees, and shell organizations that exist only on paper. Perhaps the most alarming aspect of this corruption is the coordinated effort between bureaucrats and NGOs to ensure the system remains impenetrable to scrutiny. Musk and Rogan discussed how many of these NGOs are staffed by former government officials or individuals with deep political ties, creating a revolving door where power and wealth are continuously recycled among the same elite circles. Government agencies award contracts and grants to NGOs, often with little to no competitive bidding, and those same NGOs later offer lucrative positions to the very officials who approve their funding. This cycle not only redirects taxpayer money into private hands, but also shields those involved from accountability. Investigations are rare, and when they do occur, they are often conducted by internal committees with no real incentive to expose the truth. Whistleblowers who dare to speak out find themselves silenced, their careers destroyed before they can reveal anything. This revelation is going to blow your mind. Hold tight. The biggest scam in human history. Elon Musk didn't mince words when he labeled the current state of government corruption as the biggest scam in human history. He asserted that the sheer scale of financial mismanagement, fraud, and systemic abuse within public institutions and their affiliated organizations is unprecedented. While history has seen its fair share of large-scale financial scandals, from Enron's corporate fraud to Bernie Madoff's infamous Ponzi scheme, Musk argued that these pale in comparison to the trillion-dollar siphoning of taxpayer money happening behind the scenes. Unlike corporate fraud, where perpetrators are eventually exposed and prosecuted, government corruption operates in plain sight, shielded by bureaucracy, legal loopholes, and a system designed to protect the corrupt rather than hold them accountable. Rogan, intrigued by the claim, pressed Musk on how such a massive operation could persist without mass public outrage, to which Musk responded that the complexity of the scam is its greatest defense. the public is inundated with budget numbers so large they become meaningless, and accountability is diffused across countless agencies, committees, and shadowy third-party entities, making it nearly impossible to trace where the money actually goes. To put this into perspective, Musk and Rogan pointed to historical financial scandals that, while staggering, still fall short of the ongoing government corruption Musk was describing. The 2008 financial crisis, triggered by widespread mortgage fraud and reckless banking practices, led to the largest taxpayer-funded bailout in U.S. history, over $700 billion, through the Troubled Asset Relief Program. While many banks and financial institutions collapsed, the executives responsible largely escaped punishment, and in some cases, they were even rewarded with bonuses. But Musk argued that even this pales in comparison to the systemic looting happening under the guise of government spending. He pointed to the Pentagon's infamous missing trillions, a reference to the $2.3 trillion in unaccounted funds Donald Rumsfeld admitted to just a day before 9/11, a story that was quickly overshadowed by the tragedy that followed. More recently, in 2022, the Department of Defense once again failed its audit, unable to account for over 60% of its $3.5 trillion in assets. Yet no major reforms or criminal investigations followed. Musk and Rogan also highlighted how this culture of unaccountability extends beyond government agencies to global institutions and foreign aid programs. They discussed the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, organizations that have funneled trillions of dollars into developing countries under the pretense of economic assistance. However, much of this money has disappeared into the pockets of corrupt politicians, military juntas, and corporate elites, leaving nations burdened with debt and little to show for it. The case of Afghanistan was a prime example. Over $2.3 trillion were spent by the US government over 2 decades, with much of it going to contractors, local officials, and military leaders who mismanaged or outright stole the funds. When the Taliban swiftly reclaimed power in 2021, billions of dollars in US military equipment and infrastructure investments were abandoned, raising the question of where all that money truly went. Rogan questioned why such an enormous fraud could persist unchecked, and Musk explained that the system itself is designed to prevent exposure. Investigations into government corruption often go nowhere because the individuals responsible are the same ones overseeing the inquiries. Watchdog agencies are either underfunded, politically compromised, or staffed with bureaucrats who rotate in and out of the same corrupt circles. Whistleblowers face retaliation, as seen in cases like Edward Snowden, who exposed illegal mass surveillance programs only to be exiled, while those responsible for the violations faced no consequences, even when scandals break, such as the Panama Papers leak, which revealed how elites, including politicians, used offshore accounts to hide wealth and evade taxes. There is little follow-up, and the corrupt continue their business as usual. Musk claims that this is not just about a few bad actors skimming money. It is a trillion-dollar scam perpetuated at every level, from local bureaucrats to global institutions. Unlike past financial frauds, which at least resulted in public outrage, resignations, and in some cases, jail time, the government's corruption machine is so deeply entrenched that it remains impervious to exposure. The public, either unaware or feeling powerless, has come to accept these massive financial disappearances as just another aspect of governance. So, if this is truly the biggest scam in human history, is there any way to stop it? Well, we'll get to that later. For now, let's better understand the scale of the problem. George Soros and the NGO manipulation strategy. Elon Musk's discussion of government corruption inevitably led to one of the most controversial figures in global finance and philanthropy, George Soros. Musk didn't accuse Soros of outright criminal activity, but rather of mastering a legal, yet ethically dubious strategy, leveraging the power of NGOs to extract billions from taxpayers under the guise of charitable work. According to Musk, Soros's true brilliance lies in his ability to use relatively small initial investments to create sprawling non-profit networks that become self-sustaining graft machines, continuously funded by governments while operating under noble-sounding names that obscure their true influence. While Musk's remarks were provocative, the strategy he described is not exclusive to Soros. Many powerful individuals, corporations, and interest groups have used NGOs as tools to redirect public funds for private or political gain. The process Musk outlined is deceptively simple, but highly effective. It begins with the creation of an NGO, often requiring only a modest initial investment to establish credibility and build an organizational structure. Once the NGO is operational, the next step is lobbying politicians and government agencies to secure ongoing public funding for humanitarian aid, social justice, or global development. The key to success lies in branding, choosing a name that evokes positive associations while masking the organization's true objectives. Labels like the Open Society Foundations, the National Endowment for Democracy, or the Institute for Peace sound benevolent and are thus effective. Once established, these NGOs develop vast bureaucracies that perpetuate their own existence, ensuring a continuous flow of taxpayer money. All the while, they become virtually untouchable due to their supposed humanitarian missions. Historically, this model has been used repeatedly with varying degrees of transparency and controversy. During the Cold War, the CIA secretly funded organizations like the Congress for Cultural Freedom, an NGO that promoted anti-communist intellectual movements under the guise of supporting free thought. In the 1980s, the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, a US-funded NGO, played a role in influencing elections and political uprisings in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and beyond, often funneling money to opposition groups favorable to the interests of the United States. Similarly, during the Arab Spring, many Western-funded NGOs provided financial and logistical support to activist groups, some of which later played a role in regime change efforts. While these interventions were framed as support for democratic movements, critics argue that they often led to political chaos, unintended consequences, or even the rise of authoritarianism. Soros, through his Open Society Foundations, has been one of the most prolific users of this model, funding NGOs across Europe, Africa, and the Americas with the stated mission of promoting democracy, human rights, and economic reforms. His influence has been particularly notable in Eastern Europe, where his organizations played a role in shaping post-Soviet political transitions, and in the United States, where his philanthropic network has backed progressive causes, judicial reforms, and political advocacy groups. However, Musk's critique is that these NGOs, regardless of their original intent, often become self-perpetuating institutions that funnel taxpayer money into ideological projects without direct public accountability. However, not all NGOs are vehicles for corruption. Many play vital roles in humanitarian relief, education, public health, and disaster response, often filling gaps where government agencies fail or lack the capacity to act. The problem arises when large-scale NGOs become indistinguishable from political lobbying machines, influencing governments and public policy, while receiving vast sums of taxpayer money with little oversight. Musk's concern is about the broader system that allows NGOs to operate as financial and political levers, often outside the reach of democratic checks and balances. Whether one sees this as strategic philanthropy or legalized corruption depends largely on perspective, but the reality is that the influence of well-funded NGOs on global politics and public policy is undeniable. So, how do the people see it? Public reaction and media response. The public reaction to Elon Musk's claims was swift and intense, with online commentators expressing shock at the scale of corruption he described. Social media erupted with debates, with many users commending Musk for exposing what they saw as long-standing financial misconduct deeply embedded within the US government. Others dismissed his statements as exaggerated or politically motivated, arguing that while inefficiency and mismanagement exist, they do not equate to an orchestrated trillion-dollar scam. However, what fueled the controversy further was the suggestion that Musk's revelations specifically implicated the Democratic Party. Supporters of Musk argued that the Democratic-led government had facilitated large-scale financial abuses, particularly in the distribution of taxpayer money to NGOs and special interest groups. Critics, however, countered that corruption is a bipartisan issue, pointing to examples of financial misconduct under Republican administrations as well. Musk and Rogan went further and discussed the idea that no crime syndicate in history has stolen as much wealth as governments have through mismanagement, bureaucratic inefficiency, and outright fraud. This assertion struck a chord with many, as history is filled with examples of regimes looting public funds while justifying their actions under legal and bureaucratic frameworks. For instance, during the fall of the Soviet Union, rampant corruption among Communist Party elites led to the disappearance of billions of dollars in state assets, much of which ended up in the hands of oligarchs who manipulated the privatization process. Similarly, in post-colonial Africa, leaders like Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, siphoned billions from international aid and state resources while maintaining the illusion of governance. Mobutu's wealth, estimated at $5 billion, which is equivalent to the country's entire national debt, was funneled into Swiss bank accounts, palatial estates, and a luxurious lifestyle, all while his people suffered in extreme poverty. More recent comparisons can be drawn to the 2008 financial crisis, where the US government's bailout of major banks, under the pretext of economic stability, resulted in trillions of dollars effectively rewarding the very financial institutions whose reckless behavior had caused the collapse. Similarly, in 2021, reports emerged of massive fraud in COVID-19 relief programs, with an estimated $100 billion lost to fraudulent claims, fake businesses, and bureaucratic inefficiencies. Musk's claims about corruption did not go unnoticed by mainstream media, which responded with a mixture of skepticism, criticism, and selective reporting. Left-leaning outlets framed his remarks as politically charged. On the other hand, conservative-leaning media seized upon his remarks as validation of long-held beliefs about deep state corruption and government waste, using Musk's statements to reinforce narratives about the unchecked power of bureaucrats and the misuse of taxpayer money. This polarized response mirrored past instances where high-profile figures made controversial claims about systemic corruption. In the 1970s, investigative journalist Seymour Hersh exposed the CIA's covert operations, revealing how taxpayer money was funneled into secret programs, including coup attempts and surveillance projects that violated constitutional rights. The media response at the time was similarly divided. Some praised Hersh for uncovering the truth, while others accused him of undermining national security. A more recent example is Edward Snowden's 2013 revelations about mass surveillance by the NSA. While some hailed him as a whistleblower, exposing government overreach, others condemned him as a traitor who endangered national security. However, in this case, the public response suggests that, regardless of political leanings, there is a widespread distrust of government institutions and their handling of taxpayer money. Whether Musk's remarks will lead to real scrutiny or simply fuel another round of partisan outrage remains to be seen. However, one thing is clear. When someone of Musk's influence makes such claims, the conversation doesn't fade away quickly. So, what is the Tesla billionaire going to do about this massive corruption? Musk's initiatives to cut waste in federal agencies. Elon Musk's crusade against government waste has not been limited to words. He has actively pushed for reforms aimed at enforcing accountability within federal agencies. He believes that bureaucracy has become a bloated, self-serving entity, where inefficiency is not just tolerated, but embedded into the system. Musk has long criticized the lack of oversight in federal spending, pointing out that trillions of taxpayer dollars are funneled into agencies that lack clear benchmarks for productivity. To tackle this issue, he has advocated for direct accountability measures, ensuring that every government employee justifies their role and contributions. His approach has been both praised and criticized, with some seeing it as a necessary step toward reform and others dismissing it as impractical micromanagement. One of Musk's most controversial proposals was a direct challenge to the long-standing inefficiency of the federal workforce. He sent emails to government employees requiring them to justify their weekly contributions to their respective agencies. This measure, though drastic, sought to address a growing concern about ghost employees and underperformance within government institutions. The idea was simple. If an employee could not clearly define their contributions, their position should be re-evaluated. Critics of this method argued that it was too rigid and did not take into account the complexities of government work, where impact is not always immediately measurable. Others pointed out that such a system could be abused, leading to undue pressure on lower-level employees while leaving senior bureaucrats untouched. However, Musk's supporters viewed it as a much-needed disruption of a broken system, pointing out that private sector companies, including Musk's own, demand accountability from employees on a regular basis. The problem of non-working federal employees is not a new one. There have been multiple instances in history where bureaucratic inefficiency led to massive financial waste. One notable example is the Veterans Health Administration scandal of 2014, where it was revealed that hospital administrators had been falsifying wait time records to create the illusion of efficiency, while veterans were suffering from delayed care. Investigations found that despite clear evidence of misconduct, many employees involved in the scandal remained on payroll for years due to bureaucratic protections. Similarly, in 2015, an audit of the Social Security Administration uncovered that over $300 million had been spent on a failed IT modernization project, with no accountability for those responsible. These cases exemplify the systemic problems Musk seeks to address. President Donald Trump, who made government downsizing a key aspect of his presidency, has long criticized the federal bureaucracy for harboring employees who contribute little to actual governance. His administration attempted to impose stricter performance reviews and sought to limit the influence of public sector unions, which he argued protected incompetence. Trump's endorsement of Musk's initiative reinforced the idea that the federal government had become a haven for redundancy, where thousands of employees collected salaries without producing meaningful results. However, critics of this approach warned that it could be weaponized to purge employees based on political motivations rather than performance. They pointed to past instances where government downsizing efforts disproportionately affected lower-level workers while leaving high-ranking officials untouched. Historical comparisons show that Musk's push for government accountability is not without precedent. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan launched a similarly aggressive campaign against government waste, famously targeting the bloated defense budget. One of his most memorable moments was exposing the Pentagon's excessive spending on items like a $640 toilet seat and $7,600 coffee pots. His administration pushed for reforms aimed at cutting unnecessary expenses, but bureaucratic resistance slowed progress. Similarly, in the early 2000s, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld made headlines when he admitted that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion in transactions, which raised serious concerns about financial transparency. However, there are two sides to this equation. Federal employees' backlash against accountability measures. Musk's push for accountability within federal agencies has sparked fierce resistance from government employees who have long operated with minimal oversight. Bureaucrats accustomed to job security and routine pay raises now find themselves under scrutiny, and many are not willing to accept such changes without a fight. For decades, the federal workforce has functioned under a system that makes it exceedingly difficult to fire underperforming employees, leading to a culture where inefficiency is tolerated and, in some cases, even rewarded. Musk's call for government workers to justify their contributions directly challenges this status quo, prompting backlash from unions, agency heads, and political figures who argue that such measures would undermine the stability of public institutions. One of the key factors behind this resistance is the labyrinthine bureaucracy that protects federal employees from termination. Unlike the private sector, where employees can be let go for poor performance, government workers are shielded by complex regulations and powerful unions that make firing them a long and arduous process. A glaring example of this problem was revealed in a 2017 report from the Government Accountability Office, which found that it takes an average of 150 to 370 days to remove a poor-performing federal worker, far longer than the process in most private organizations. Even in cases of serious misconduct, employees often remain on the payroll for extended periods, while appeals and reviews drag on. In one infamous case, a Department of Veterans Affairs employee was caught watching pornography on the job for hours each day, but was still employed for months due to bureaucratic red tape. Musk's accountability measures, including performance reviews and justification emails, directly threaten this system, leading to an uproar from those who benefit from it. Beyond job security, federal employees in Washington, D.C. enjoy a level of wealth and privilege that many Americans find excessive. While government work is often portrayed as a service-oriented profession, many high-ranking bureaucrats live lavish lifestyles funded by taxpayer dollars. According to a 2021 report, the average federal salary far exceeds that of the private sector, with government workers earning nearly 70% more in total compensation, when including benefits, than their private sector counterparts in similar roles. The perks go beyond salaries. Many federal employees receive generous pensions, near-automatic pay raises, and extensive vacation time, often accumulating wealth while contributing little in terms of measurable productivity. The contrast between the extravagant lifestyles of Washington bureaucrats and the struggles of average taxpayers has fueled frustration. However, Musk's push for accountability has also ignited outrage among left-wing political circles, particularly those who see his efforts as an attack on public institutions rather than a necessary reform. Many progressive commentators argue that the billionaire's approach is overly aggressive and ignores the complexities of government work. Critics claim that government inefficiency is not simply the result of lazy employees, but a reflection of systemic issues, including outdated policies, underfunded departments, and a lack of modernization. Musk's insistence on personal accountability, they argue, places undue blame on individual workers rather than addressing the deeper flaws within the system. To better understand the nuances of the challenge, we can take a look at an example from 2017, when President Trump signed executive orders making it easier to fire underperforming government workers. In response, unions launched legal battles to block the measures, arguing that they violated workers' rights. Despite the outrage, the issue remains clear. The American public is growing increasingly frustrated with a government that seems more focused on protecting its own workforce than serving taxpayers. While Musk's approach may be controversial, his core argument, that accountability must be enforced, is difficult to dismiss. Whether his efforts will result in meaningful change or simply reinforce the status quo remains to be seen, but the debate over government inefficiency is far from over. Mass resignations and federal payouts. Amid Musk's brutal crackdown on government inefficiency, 77,000 federal employees decided to step down rather than fight a losing battle, much like his actions at Twitter, where he famously sent an ultimatum email demanding employees commit to a new, more rigorous work ethic or take severance. Musk applied a similar strategy to federal workers in an attempt to weed out redundant and underperforming employees. In his email, which was sent across multiple agencies, Musk asked government employees to take a severance package and retire, or else wait to be fired. The concept of government buyouts is not new. Historically, administrations have used voluntary separation programs to reduce workforce size without resorting to outright layoffs, which can be politically contentious. For example, during the Clinton administration in the 1990s, federal buyouts were implemented to cut down the size of the workforce amid budget constraints. Similarly, in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, the government offered buyouts to federal employees as part of broader cost-cutting measures. However, in both cases, the reductions were relatively modest and targeted specific agencies. What makes this latest wave of resignations unprecedented is its sheer scale. Never before have so many federal employees opted to leave in such a short time, raising serious questions about the necessity of these positions in the first place. Rather than risk being exposed as redundant, these employees took the severance packages, securing a soft landing while avoiding public scrutiny. However, while a significant number of employees quietly took their payouts and left, others have chosen to voice their outrage in mainstream media. Outlets like CNN and The Washington Post have featured interviews with former federal workers decrying the supposed injustice of Musk's efficiency campaign. These individuals argue that public sector jobs cannot be measured in the same way as corporate ones, and that demanding workers to quantify their contributions oversimplifies complex government functions. Some claim they were pushed out despite performing vital roles, while others insist that the buyout program unfairly targeted long-standing employees. The contrast between those who resigned without protest and those who now seek sympathy in the media underscores a fundamental divide. Some recognize that their positions were largely ceremonial, while others refuse to acknowledge that their jobs might have been unnecessary in the first place. This wave of resignations plays directly into Musk's larger vision of exposing and reforming government inefficiency. For years, he has criticized the bureaucratic bloat that slows down innovation and wastes resources, and the mass buyouts serve as proof that his concerns were not unfounded. If 77,000 employees could walk away without creating a noticeable disruption in government operations, it raises a critical question. Were their roles essential in the first place? This mirrors past instances of bureaucratic overreach, such as the Defense Department's infamous $125 billion in administrative waste uncovered in 2016, a report that was deliberately buried to prevent public outrage. The federal government has a long history of shielding inefficiencies from scrutiny, but Musk's push for transparency is forcing long-ignored issues into the spotlight. While critics argue that mass resignations could weaken government operations, Musk's supporters see it as a necessary purge of inefficiency. Government agencies have long been plagued by redundant positions, excessive staffing, and a culture of entitlement that shields underperforming employees from consequences. The current backlash against Musk's reforms mirrors the resistance faced by past leaders who sought to rein in bureaucratic excess, from Reagan's push to cut federal spending in the 1980s to Trump's attempts to streamline government agencies during his presidency. Each of these efforts faced fierce opposition from public sector unions and career bureaucrats, but they also resonated with a tax-paying public frustrated by government waste. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.